start trickling in. We've got, the numbers are going 8, 9, 10. Cool. All right, sweet. Well, great. It's Friday night. That's probably not a catchphrase that'll stick around. But yes, welcome everyone to Friday Drinks with Nam yet again. Tonight we are joined by the amazing Ursula from Ursula Chandler Architects. And so we're going to be talking to her about her amazing work since she started her firm only a little while ago. So it's really fantastic to have you tonight. First, we'll just say a very quick thank you to our sponsors who've made this all possible. So we have two amazing sponsors, our incredible major sponsor, MATA, the people at Monash who are taking care of so many students, so many teachers, and in effect also taking care of their friends and family who don't want to have to care about them even more because they don't have wonderful teachers who can take care of them. The people at MATA are wonderful teachers and they're taking care of all their students and all the people who work there. So congratulations, MATA and Monash. You're doing an amazing job. And it's so great that we don't have to worry about you because you're just doing so great. And anyone out there who's watching who is a sessional teacher or a full-time teacher at Monash, thank you so much for all the incredible work that you're doing, taking care of your students via Zoom or whatever platform that you're using. And also our other awesome sponsor, Hames Paints, the local paint guys. They are so good. I used them on one of my projects in Tassie recently, and they just made everything so easy and seamless. Their amazing paint specification team really goes out of their way to help you specify the paints that you need for the projects that you're working on, whatever the substrate, whatever the period in time the project might be in. Mine was an Art Deco building in Launceston. They brought things to the table that I hadn't thought of at all, and they were absolutely wonderful. So please, if you're looking into paints and you haven't thought of Hames, think of Hames. And I think, if they're watching, maybe that could be a new slogan. Hames, think of us, or just think of Hames. Workshop it, see how it goes. Anyway, it's Friday night. If it were another time in history, we'd probably be in our offices having a drink with our colleagues. And tonight we are having a drink with Ursula Chandler. So, Ursula, good evening.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Thanks for coming. And what are you drinking tonight? What's it called?
So this has been aptly renamed a Coroni. Which we were just discussing earlier. It's basically a poorly made Negroni. It's kind of what you make on a Friday night. It doesn't have any orange. I haven't really measured it. It's very nice.
So it's just a free pour, no garnish.
Yeah, no, it's pretty basic, pretty rough and ready.
Good.
Yeah, it tastes good. So that's good.
Good stuff. All right. So where are you at the moment? Let's paint a picture. Are you at home? Are you still going into your office? Like what's the deal?
So we actually work out of, I have an old terrace shop, so an old Victorian terrace, sort of typical ones with a shop front down the bottom opposite Edinburgh Gardens. Mm-hmm. So we already work from home technically. Try and keep the door shut and not go into the home too much. But so it hasn't been a massive adjustment. We have a big room with a big shared desk. Got a big kind of set of shelves with all our models and bits and pieces and books. And we haven't had to change too much. So we don't have much boundary between work and home, but kind of works. I can see some of my old colleagues on the phone. I kind of quite like working strange hours, so
right.
It allows for that a bit more than if you had a separate home office. So
right, cool. Well, I was talking to someone about this the other day. So what are your ideal hours? Because not everyone is built for 9 to 5. I think it's actually a little bit crazy, the whole idea that everyone on the planet is somehow meant to fit into this window. What would be your ideal hour breakdown?
I'm somewhat reluctant to tell you, Daniel, because you told me we were recording this. And I don't really want it out there. look, try and sit down before 10. I went, normally we sit down around 9, just for some self-discipline, but always try and sit down before 10. If I was being completely honest, and I will be honest because it's just a Friday night casual chat, I kind of like, any time after about 9 p.m. I quite like when everyone else goes to bed and you can sit up on your own slightly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that would open up a lot of possibilities, if people said, look, if you can come in any time, technically, as long as you just hit these 7.5 hours.
Hit your hours.
Rock up whenever you like, and then it's just, you just got to work out the communication side of it. So surely you can make it work.
Yeah, I think, you can't do it all the time. I think if you do it too much, you end up slightly in this parallel world to everybody else. But
well, we'd end up having day people and night people, and there would be this weird sort of probably crossover and blurring of the edges when people had to move into the space if they were the night crew when the day crew went home. Well, as Ursula and I chat, everyone who's watching, feel free to put your questions in the chat window at the bottom of the screen. And as we go, if I see something pop up, if I find an opportune time, I'll remember to ask Ursula. So, okay, let's hear a little bit about your work. So let's start with your practice before we get into the work. So tell us about when you set up, how you set up, and how that all went.
So we were just talking about it. I lived in London for 6 years, so I was kind of away for a long time. And I came back in 2018, not really sure if I was going to stay. And so I didn't really set the practice up properly maybe until the end of 2018. And the first thing I did was set the office up. That took a little bit of time.
Is that like
I guess it was strange. Sorry?
Was that the actual physical setting up, or was that
like a built desk and painted the room and did all those sorts of things. It was kind of a little bit dishevelled, so that took a couple of months.
Yeah.
But I guess it was kind of strange because most times you would set up an office, you would have been working somewhere for a few years, so you might sort of slowly, wean yourself off a permanent job, or a couple of people might say to you, hey, I've got something, and you would go off that way.
Yeah.
Whereas it didn't really happen like that. I kind of came back for sort of various reasons, and then I was a bit like, okay, so I guess I need to get back into this. So maybe without that kind of consistency, if I'd just been working here for a few years. But
I think that's an interesting side of the starting of a practice side of architecture is that at the moment there's not really a book on starting an architecture practice. Here are the 10 steps that you must take to successfully set it up. I was talking to Fui from UF Architects the other day about that, and it sort of seems like we all kind of wing it, and it doesn't. I don't think that's kind of good though, because it means that there's no real wrong answers. There's no real wrong ways of doing it.
Yeah, exactly. Is it open to total interpretation?
Yeah,
I think Melbourne's quite a good place to. And I should say thank you for having me. Like, I think Melbourne is quite a supportive place for this sort of stuff, for a small business, especially maybe compared somewhat to a place like London, where it's just a much bigger city and it's much more competitive. There's organisations like yours, and it feels like a sort of quite a small community that are really supportive one. And you sort of come across, because it's a smaller city, you come across the same people if you're teaching, if you're at talks, and that's been a nice thing. Like, even just reconnecting with people I knew previously, and they're very supportive, and that's great.
I would love to do a bit of a deep dive and try to find out where this culture has come from in Melbourne and in Australia as well, where there seems to have always been some sort of small community groups that have existed where they're just like, no, we really want to see what each other's doing and to ask questions and to have a look at their work. So we try to make sure that we're talking to each other and try to provide some support if we can. But that's really awesome that you came back from London and you thought, right, I better get back into it, and you started a practice as opposed to thinking, I'm coming back to Australia, I'm going to get a job in Australia.
Yeah, I mean, I had worked here already, and I think I just got to a point where I probably wouldn't have. I didn't really want to come back and work for someone else. Partly the reason to come back, I guess, was to be able. I thought it'd be much easier to set up a business here than overseas.
Mm.
And I think.
Did you already have a couple of projects where people were just asking you if you could do some work for them, or?
I had a couple of people, but that was a bit flaky. Like it didn't really go anywhere. So no, it was just a kind of. Hopefully this works out kind of approach. I mean, that's still the approach. So it wasn't. It wasn't a very well planned decision. I guess it was just a we'll make this work kind of decision.
That's cool. So how did you make that work? Did you start off doing some projects that were, I guess, a little bit more open without, confirmed start dates or anything like that? Or did you have to wait for one client who just said, let's go for it?
Well, the first thing we started on, which I put some slides of it, was that NGV competition. And that was really just trying to have a deadline for something and kind of put something together that was, my own, the practices.
Right.
And then just as that was happening, I got a job, which was really fortunate. It's a job, which again, I was going to talk about tonight. It's in Macedon Ranges, and it was kind of fitted sort of, if someone said to me, what would be a really good project that you'd like to do? It kind of just happened to fit that brief.
Magic.
So that kind of happened, and then it's just sort of had other little bits and pieces along the way. But that's really only in the last, less than a year and a half. So. Yeah,
wow, that's quite.
Very.
All right. Well, did you want to show us some of these slides so we can have a look? Is the first project your NGV project?
Yes. Yep. That's
right.
So obviously most people on the call are probably from Melbourne, but I can see a couple of London people. So the NGV is our National Gallery in Victoria, and they run an architecture commission every year, which is quite amazing. Everyone is invited to enter it. And they haven't run it this year, but they did run it for, I think, about 5 years. So, yeah, we entered that with this little pavilion. It's basically a play on a tower, and it was really just a response to the city and the sort of verticalisation of what's happened in Melbourne and probably all around the world in the last 15 years. And this view beyond the back courtyard where the pavilion's located. As if you look back at Google, it's just like completely changed. In fact, it was not from Google, it was from the photos the competition issued, and they were a couple of years old, and the view had completely changed with these mega towers.
Yeah, wow, okay. So is each of these tubes, is that to frame a view, or what are they doing?
So the tower is a scaffold, and that was partly the site is a suspended slab above a car park. So it's actually got quite a lot, and it's really windy. It's got quite a lot of constraints, and the budget isn't that, considering what the site is. The budget's quite small, and it was really. And they've got quite a short period of time to assemble and disassemble the installation.
Right. Okay.
So the tower is a scaffold, so it could come in easily. Could easily be put on this slab, and then the screen references back. We wanted to have a kind of shade screen around it, and we were looking at kind of local precedents, and we got really into these old. I don't know if you've seen them before. The old kind of colonial houses that are made of old pressed out oil tins. So these makeshift metal shingles.
Yeah, right. I think I have seen some images, a while ago, but okay.
Yeah, quite beautiful, these sort of metal shingle houses just made from this sort of typical Australian what's lying around, especially at that time, obviously. And so we decided to make this. The other thing I guess we were thinking about with the pavilion is what would kind of happen to all the stuff when it all got pulled down, and how we could maybe make something that was recyclable or from a recycled source. And we were at this scrapyard. There's a scrapyard out in Sunbury. Again, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called the Scrappies. If you need any scrap metal.
That's right. Good tip for everyone who's looking for some scrap metal to get whack some metal bits together. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very inspiring place, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
all these bits of old steel. But we found this bit of old air conditioning ductwork, and we were thinking, could that be something? Because it had this quite nice circular form to it. But they're all they're kind of angled down, and as you move up the tower, they open up. So as you can't see my pointer, but as you're coming up, they kind of radiate upwards, so that you can't see the view, and as you arrive at the platform.
Ah, right. Okay, I get that.
This view of this city beyond, and I guess that was also thinking about the NGV having this competition and thinking what should the pavilion kind of do, or what do you want people to kind of think about or come away with.
Yeah, I guess for a lot of people who've not, looked in detail into the brief for the NGV competition, did it feel like it was like a traditional architecture brief, or does it lean a lot more towards some sort of artistic expression, or is that sort of up for interpretation?
Well, they did have, I mean, it was a year ago now, so I'm remembering, but they did have this quite strong aspect about working, sort of having some sort of material expression to it. So working either with local fabricators or some sort of, we didn't do this, but some sort of prefabricated system. But yeah, I think it was quite open. I think, I mean, they haven't run it this year, but it was always very open. And you can see that, I guess, from looking at the 5 that they had over the last 5 years. They're all completely different from each other, which is probably a good thing.
Yeah, very cool. And I mean, so you were shortlisted, right, in this competition?
Yeah. So,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, that was quite exciting. And I guess the reason why I included it, because it was the first thing we worked on, was what I was sort of talking about earlier. I think, it's quite daunting to kind of set up a business and think, what am I going to do with this? And that was quite a good affirmation for me. Like, no, there's, maybe some good opportunities to do some things here. And so that was a kind of positive way to start. Although unfortunately, obviously we didn't win, but that's all right.
No, that's okay. I think, sometimes going through the projects and not getting them can also be super beneficial. I remember a lecturer telling us at university that, sometimes firms actually, put a lot of effort into their projects, but really, really want to come second because they don't want to build it. They just want to be able to put the thing together and, go through the whole process. And I really like that you said then that, you were still, I guess, conceptualizing what you wanted to do work-wise and what the firm wanted to do. Off the back of this, have you now come closer to an actual, concrete idea of what Ursula Chandler Architects does or would like to do?
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, I think probably it helps somewhat, but I don't think I've got some sort of crystal clear. I think that's a kind of evolving thing. But I mean, I'm interested in these sorts of public projects. I'm interested in materiality. I mean, I think there's just a way you sort of slightly start to work once you've worked for a little while, but no, I can't give you like a sort of silver bullet answer to that.
No, that's okay. I think that's one of the great things about, starting out, is that it can be really open, and that, it's sort of playing it, flying by the seat of your pants. And, that's really exciting, because once you finish one project, you can be like, oh, I thought we were heading down that route, but now I've tried that and I think I want to head in this direction.
Yeah, and I guess you don't have a lot of control over the sort of projects you're going to get as well, or, what a client's going to want. And when you start out, you're not really going to say no to that many projects. You might somewhat, but you sort of, like you say, flying by the seat of your pants, like what's going to come up. And so
cool.
And I guess I included this slide as well because this is a 1:20 model, but we also made this at 1:1.
Oh, what, the section that we're seeing on the right, that was actually made at 1:1.
I'll show you. It's just kind of on the, it's in the window.
Oh wow, that's so cool. I thought for a second that the image on the right was that you guys were super good at making like to scale pop rivets, and that you took this really awesome like iPhoto image of this really cool model, and I was like, oh my god, these guys are like the best modelers ever.
And that was made in the backyard by Marco, who I entered the competition with. He's a friend of mine. He's an artist.
Right.
But
That's fantastic. It would have been amazing to see it being built because they were all angled at different, different angles. So when it rained, you probably would have got these really awesome effects, coming into the space maybe.
Lost opportunities. Never mind.
So while this was happening, was this also happening at the same time as the Mount Macedon project, or was this?
No, we kind of, we just finished this. This was obviously the office was quite small, so this was kind of enough to work on at once. And we weren't working on this for that long. That's quite a quick turnaround.
Right, okay.
So I think we went and they called up and we're like, oh, can you wait a month? And they're like, sure. So, we went up after that. But,
oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So how did you know these people in Mount Macedon? Was it a family friend or was it old colleague?
They're sort of family friends of. No, sorry, they're friends of a family friend of mine. So they do. The client's actually a really beautiful woodworker, and they do this woodworking class together. And they've had this beautiful old property for about 20 years. They've kind of raised their 4 children in it, and they wanted to build this extra kind of space for various reasons.
Okay, so have you got an image of the house?
Oh yeah, here it is.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So, right, big property, I'm assuming, like we're only seeing a portion of it probably. And right, so what we're seeing on the right, is this like a barn, or is it like the inside of the existing house? Like, what are we seeing?
I'm so used to taking the annotate tool from teaching online, but I'm going to take it. So this is the wool shed down here. So this is an eternal view of the wool shed, which the client has been, I would say, modestly repairing. It kind of was falling down. Clear that off. But the property's, like you say, it's 100 acres, so it's pretty significant. It's and it's I kind of want to use the annotate tool because I don't have a pointer. So the landscape.
Favour, can we give Ursula the annotate function?
Well, no, I think I can just do it. Can you see what I'm doing?
Is that your hand?
Can you see that?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't. I'll just describe it. So to the north is Riddles Creek, and to the south is Jackson's Creek, and the kind of land falls away down to the east. So it's on a kind of old lava plain. That whole area is like this old volcanic plain. So Mount Macedon's kind of in front of the property.
Okay. Someone's just saying that they can see the mark that you're making. So if you wanted to continue to do it, that's fine. So.
Oh, I see. I've got chat time. Pick a pen. Okay. Cool. I'll probably. So maybe I will do it that way because I'm just so used to teaching that way now. But, so the property is from 1870. It's got the kind of typical hedgerows that you see, and this is the main house. The main house burnt down in 1920, so the main house is from the 1920s.
Right.
And obviously sort of facing north-south. But there's all these old outbuildings around that are from the 1870s.
Right.
So this one here is like this beautiful old pigsty. It's all made from the basalt, and there's a stables and a cottage and all those sorts of things. And I'm already was quite obsessed with the sort of homestead typology. It's always been my favourite type of building, and all these little outbuildings that kind of form this little collection of buildings.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. Having all these different buildings that serve different functions.
Yeah, and they're always designed because of, at that time, just to do that kind of bare minimum of what the function was. And then the client found that there's bits in here where the grass wasn't growing and things like that, and then the client would sort of tear away a bit of grass and realise someone had laid all these old basalt pebbles that they'd found into these terraced areas.
Oh wow! Okay. So what did they salvage them and then
they just pulled the grass off and they're all still there. They're so beautiful.
Wow.
Sort of was, I stopped myself because you guys said not too many slides, but
well, that's cool.
They're all because the site, like the clay, it's this really heavy soil, and in wintertime it's like total mud, and then in summer you get these literal kind of cracks through it.
Wow. It must be really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
Seeing all of the different things that the landscape will do there, that's quite different to even different parts of Victoria,
Yeah, exactly. And just thinking about all that kind of history and all those things that have happened there. So yeah, it was kind of this little perfect project that popped up, and the client wanted to. They didn't really use this garden to the south, where there's about 50 kangaroos that live actually like under this tree over here. They're always there, and there's these beautiful views out this way that kind of look down towards this valley. So weren't really using that part of the house because it's an older style house with still quite a traditional layout. So everything was facing north. So can we put an area on the back? So we start using this garden, and I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And in my head, I was like, well, it's all going to be south facing. So that's obviously a bit of a problem. And then the other thing, they renovated the house a little bit 20 years ago, but it's all sort of one style of this 1920s stucco house. And they were quite concerned with sort of having something very foreign and kind of contemporary put on the back that would be at odds with the rest of the house.
Right. Okay.
So that was
so I guess that's a tricky brief, right? So you've got to do something modern, but still it's got to fit in, and maybe it's not, not your favourite style or something, It's like...
Well, it was just kind of, I didn't want to kind of keep making this amorphous bit of new house because then it would be so much bigger than the existing original house.
Gotcha. Okay.
And there was quite a small budget as well. Well, not small, but it didn't have an endless budget.
Yeah. Okay. So if we focus on the image on the right, is this with some of the salvaging additions that the client has been putting into that space? And were they?
This is just the wall shed as it stands.
Okay.
So it's kind of this obviously mixture of all these bits holding things up, and it's just being added to. This is an old bit of coffee sack that was, is 100 and so years old. It was an old shade for the skylight.
Right.
So it's absolutely beautiful. It's just sitting there in this state of like someone's just walked out at some time. But that, I guess what we did is they gave me this brief and we walked around and looked at all these outbuildings as well. So sorry, taking a while to talk about this. And then that became maybe what we used. That just became the obvious way to maybe put this new addition on, because suddenly we could build this slightly separate thing as a going building. It gave us a lot more freedom in terms of orientating it towards these views, trying to get some good east-west light through it.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then also kind of giving a language for how to make it that wouldn't be glaringly at odds with what was around it. But also,
so does that mean that this is also going to be part of your work? Then no.
This is just how we started thinking about it. So just what one of these outbuildings might be, and we were thinking about trying to expose as much of the structure as possible, using this raked roof form, and trying to keep it quite informal. The rest of the house is much more formal, so trying to keep how could you make another space that would let them kind of open up and use the garden more and have a different quality than the rest of it.
Very cool. Okay, so we've got this wonderful reference with these barns and the outhouses, and you've got this other house that you have to put the addition onto. So where did you go next in terms of the design process? How did you sort of bring these things together?
So it's really just a single large room. The only real requirement of the room was to fit a billiards table or some sort of smaller billiards table in it that was quite flexible. So basically it's into that south garden. It's sort of facing in an east-west direction.
Right.
And then keeping the kind of aesthetic or the language of it, just the other buildings around it, there's a lot of weatherboard. So just keeping it all very clean, but thinking about the openings and how they might connect back to the site. So this one was actually inspired by this. If you drive into Bacchus Marsh on the Avenue of Honour, there's this beautiful old shed with this huge sliding door that kind of comes out into the surrounding farmland. Someone's made this sort of weird concrete post. So that was kind of where we started. It originally had this big shade structure that slid over it, but that got replaced by this grape structure. But just making a really simple form, and then having these big doors that they open right back against that solid weatherboard piece here. So you can kind of open the building right up to the east and the west.
Yeah, wonderful. So, yeah, and I mean, is that also a shade structure above the little porch there, the little veranda?
Yeah, that's a bit. This job is actually out for tender at the moment.
Okay.
So that's a little bit. That's a provisional sum. I'm trying to, maybe with the builder, we're going to try and get this shade structure, this door back. But
very cool. And it looks a little bit like it's salvaged timber. Do you think some of that's going to come from somewhere else on the site, or is that, am I saying it wrong?
No, you're saying it right. So as I said, the client is a really beautiful woodworker. He was actually interested in building it himself, but I somewhat talked him out of it. So we've tried to keep a few elements that he's going to come in and work on. So we've got a big pivot door, there's some joinery, and hopefully he's got all these great bits of old timber from the farm. Hopefully the shade structure as we work it up.
That's fantastic. So does that mean you get to sort of...
He's going to make some part of it.
That's really lovely. So I mean, does that mean that you guys get to sort of pick at the details together as the building sort of comes together? He'll come along and you can say, okay, how about like 1-to-1? You can both say to each other, can this go here, or how do you feel about this area? Yeah,
and we've got this great builder on board. He's not quite confirmed yet, but he's really up for it too. He's sort of quite into that as well, and I think we met last week because we're going through this tender. We just sort of picked a few items. Like, okay, we can hand those over to Gary. So hopefully goes on site and that works.
It's so good. I mean, I think it's always great when you start to feel really excited about a builder because you feel like you can talk to them, and it seems like you're both seeing the same vision. It's really great. And so I guess I'm guessing that builder's a local builder as well, who's from Macedon. Yeah,
we found that in Macedon, that area, most of the builders they only work in that area, and this contract was negotiated because they're all really busy. And a lot of new buildings going up there, so if you're good, then you are busy. And so hopefully, we'll get his price back, and that will happen, and that will just be this good stroke of luck that he happened to be free. And because I think it's obviously quite a small job, but I think it just happened to be opportune and good coming together. So we'll see at the end of that if that's a true statement.
And now you're at the stage with negotiating with builders and things like that. Looking back, so at this image, looking back at where you were before, and you were sort of thinking, "Oh, I really want this piece of architecture to fit in with this existing building and not be amorphous and not be this sort of just a piece of building that fits into now, as just like other parts of this site have been." Does it feel like you're heading in the right direction?
I'm probably not the right person to comment on that. I'll probably put that to the chat. I mean, we'll see. The paint colour, I think, will probably be relatively important. And the house is being repainted, so this is from a few months ago. But
right.
We'll see, we'll see what happens. But
I
mean, I guess at the end we'll be able to be our own critic.
Yeah, and I think that's something that you get to do in your young practice, and sometimes you have sort of aspirational things that you see in your drawings, and when you start talking to a builder and they start saying like, "Oh, that thing that you're saying that you've drawn here, can we do it a little bit differently?" All those sort of little negotiations start to happen, and it's just a part of the vision just starts to just change a little bit as it goes along. I feel like I've only got a couple of projects under my belt, my own practice as well, and it's an interesting sort of seeing just how much it can change at each major sort of stage. And even when it's like, okay, finally got to the end of contract doc, all right, now we just talk to builders and they just make it happen. And then as soon as you start talking to builders, it just starts to shift again. Cool. So was there another project after this one in your slides?
No, there's another image of this, which is just that view.
That would be great to see. Yeah,
It's
beautiful.
very simple. It's really just about framing these views out. So if you come down, there's a link that kind of connects it, and this window kind of frames this view out. This windbreak. There's these beautiful old cypress pines.
Stunning.
So, yeah,
really beautiful. I loved in the last image you could see that awesome detail that you've used in the sliding window that we can see in the background at the moment, where so that window will completely slide out and then be like outside of the building, so you won't see any of the window frame. Yeah,
it'll all slide out of the way.
Yeah, it's a really cool detail.
But we'll see. We haven't got the price back yet, so no, we've got an estimate. I think we'll be okay.
Fantastic. And I mean the floorboards, they are going to be recycled from local?
No, that's just, they have an existing timber floor, so that's just flat part. It's just matching their floor. But that would be a nice feature. But
yeah, very cool. So with this project, you know, under your belt, let's say it finishes exactly as it's been. Do you think that this, you know, if it ends up sort of being as you've drawn it, do you feel like this is, because you've got this quite artistic project in the city, and then you've got this very nice, beautiful, poetic, considered, detailed, rustic and yet modern kind of project as well. So they've got some differences. Do you feel like if this one gets built how you like, then you'll start to lean towards projects out in regional areas, or do you think you'll still want to balance the two?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely interested in working in regional areas, but I mean, we've been doing some other projects in the city, like we've been doing some feasibilities for a developer, and I think public work is always going to be an attractive thing. But in terms of residential, because I think, especially in Australia, like a lot of what small practices do is residential. More so maybe even, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think that seems to be a lot of the bulk of what people do, and even like quite sort of, a lot of practice do quite high-end residential compared to, in my mind, to the UK. But
really? What's the big difference between Australia and the UK in that regard?
Well, I think in the UK it's just a lot different, and then the planning is much bigger constraint. You can't just, I mean, I think a lot of UK architects will come here and just be speechless what you're allowed, and I don't mean this in a negative way, what you're allowed to build. You really are on the back of a house allowed within Res Code do as you artistically see fit. And that's hugely different. Their planning controls are really strong.
Okay, so does that mean, when you say strong, what do you mean? Is it in terms of the style? Is it an artistic style sort of thing?
Size and the style and what you can make it from and how,
wow, okay.
Yeah, it's really is quite significantly different in my opinion.
Right, okay.
You can't just pick a material and kind of be like, oh, we're just going to do this with it. You have to kind of, especially in sort of a more heritage area. So it is different like that. Whereas I think there's a lot more freedom in terms of residential here, and like the weather, I think, leads obviously itself, and the whole context. It's obviously much more, you know, that's an understatement. It's a much newer city if you look at the kind of European history of Australia. So,
yeah, definitely.
But I think in the UK as well, there seems to be, I think there's a lot more investment by councils and more public institutions into public work. And I think as well, there's probably a lot more opportunity for smaller practices in that capacity in the UK.
Right, okay.
Whereas here, I think we don't really have that same investment. We have a lot of private money invested in private property, which is obviously primarily residential.
Right, okay. So. Well, I'm very interested. I mean, it's an interesting point you bring up with the planning, because, you know, some people might think in regional areas where you have fewer people right next to you, and then the zoning controls that we have in Australia, like in rural zones, you can almost do what you like sort of stylistically, I guess, probably because who are you going to bother with whatever style? But then this extension, it's really beautiful in how it wouldn't be a Japanese, it wouldn't be a Japanese building. It wouldn't be probably on a UK building. It looks like a very Australian Victorian building as well. When you look to your projects, I mean, are you drawing a lot from Australian architects, or are you still pulling in a lot of inspiration from UK architects or people from other countries?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just pulling, you sort of flip around and you're pulling from everywhere. Like, this is really more looking at the local buildings more than sort of local architect. I mean, I don't know who designed those outbuildings, probably just the, Scottish guy who was shearing the sheep had to put up the wool shed. So, yeah, I think it's more trying to look at what's around you and what you can kind of extract from that, or what's interesting. And for me, I kind of like the directness and the kind of simplicity of these buildings. And it suited the problems that I had with, well, not the problems, but the constraints I had with the brief to kind of work that way. But, if I was working on a building in the city or somewhere else, it probably wouldn't be the right response. So I guess that's that question of if you want to have some sort of style or you're just responding to something, which,
yeah. So, yeah, I guess so you just mentioned that you were working with, they weren't problems, but it was quite a strict brief. And was it a good brief? Like, did they know exactly what they wanted, or was it quite open in terms of they just wanted to get a little bit more space for something?
Yeah, I mean, that was very much the brief, and just, we want to use this part of the garden. So
right, okay.
Just like the doors, which is obviously, the door is just a door, but trying to make it do something more than just be a door. So it sort of slides back. So hopefully the whole room.
Right.
Although we did have to then recess in this massive fly screen, which
okay.
we have that unfolds.
Oh, is that for fire, like bushfire attack level stuff, or?
No, I mean, it does have a low bell rating, but no, that was just because it's in the country and the client is just not going to not have a fly screen. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
But we've hopefully got this sort of recessed detail with this fly screen that kind of went and had a look. I think it will work, but
yeah, right.
we'll see.
I think I'm sure it will work.
Yeah.
I guess that's also sort of one of those tricky things. I think maybe some people think that the more open your brief is, the easier it might be, because then you can just go like, oh, okay, so I just got to make some, put up 4 walls, a floor, and a roof, and we're all sweet. But did you have to push the client a little bit in terms of, how, like, what do they do for hobbies? How do they live already, or how do they want to live? Do you have to push the brief or push the client a little bit more to get those answers?
I mean, I think those are really good questions that obviously that is what anyone should be asking. Like, what do you want from this? Because obviously, the most important thing for me, I mean, maybe not everyone thinks, is that the client comes away from all the effort and expense of it, and is, they're putting this huge amount of trust in you that you're going to somehow facilitate this thing that they want. So yeah, I didn't have to push them, but yeah, that was important to sort of sit with them and talk to them about. But they were quite broad in that, so it didn't necessarily provide a lot of additional constraints. But yeah, definitely always trying to kind of put a drawing in front of them and say, so would you sit neat out here, or would you do this? And, oh, well, we might. So then we will. So it's drawing. But,
it can be tough, some of that back and forth, if some people might not be able to visualize things like that. So it is a tricky thing, I think, to balance out sometimes with a client.
I guess this is quite a simple, small job as well. So it doesn't feel inconceivable that on site, as you start to frame it up, more little things could happen, which is probably much harder in a big new build house where there's like, oh, here's 50 variations. Suddenly the project's completely different. But
yeah, right.
it's obviously a modest scale, so hopefully that could maybe happen a bit more on site.
Yes, yeah, they'll figure it out when they get there. All right, so we've got some questions pouring in. Looks like we've got quite a bit of interest with your UK experience. So what has been the biggest change from practicing in the UK? And if the opportunity arose, which larger Melbourne practices would you collaborate with? And that's from Chris Romilly, Studio Occupy.
At Studio Occupy. Hey, Chris.
So is that one of your old practices?
Yes, before I worked with Ajay, I worked with Studio Occupy.
That's nice.
Yeah. So the biggest change from practicing in the UK? I think probably just going back, I guess to answer the question, Chris, I guess when I worked in the UK, I was always working for someone else. So the biggest change for me has actually been working for myself. That's just been a big learning curve or a big adjustment, especially given like the last practice I worked in was 70 people and, you're working in a team of people. So that just going back to working on your own or with a small couple of people, and just having to set up all that business side of running a business. So it's not just the projects. It's all the other things, which, I sort of tend to do to a degree. I use, like websites and all these things that take time to do, or Instagram or whatever it is people are doing. But I think, there's just basic things like the whole context of Australia is different, and what might be the way what you might want to look at here or explore here is different, because the whole city's got a completely different history and it's a completely different, we live in a different way. It's much less dense, climate's really different. So I think there's just fundamental things that you're thinking about different stuff, or you're kind of preoccupied with different things.
It's also got to be a bit of a relief, I guess, as, but coming from Australia, where it's definitely the cities are dominated by, colonial design, that, so many people would think that if you're used to working in Australian cities, then you could just transplant yourself to the UK and it probably would be exactly the same. But, if it actually is culturally and historically, there's all of those different things that you need to consider. That can also be refreshing, I guess.
Yeah. I think it is refreshing, and maybe coming sort of home and like kind of you sort of have this different emotional attachment to somewhere that you're more familiar with. But and then the other thing would just be what I said earlier. I just think there's a slightly different, for a practice, there's just, I think, a lot more residential here, but potentially on average for private residential, a lot more individuality, because people can do more and maybe put more money into it, because they have that bigger flexibility. So the house means more, like represents more of somebody. But maybe there's other opportunities in the UK in terms of, they have so many competitions for like a public pavilion like the NGV.
Right.
All different scales, always, and whereas we have really one.
Yeah, I've talked to a few people who are involved in government, OVGA and a few things like that, and I was just saying, what could there not be some more, projects for younger architects, and can we get something going there? And I'd point out, that the UK is actually doing quite well in that regard, and that the lottery over there is just amazing, and that it can keep funding certain built projects quite significantly. But it'd be really fantastic to see some of that more in Australia. I mean, in Sydney, they've got a process to actually sort of pre-approve younger practices for smaller projects that are for government. So it'd be wonderful to see that in Victoria.
Yeah, I worked, the last project I worked at Ajay was this community centre in George Street in Sydney. And that was part of a big land lease master plan, but there was a building, and I can't remember the architect's name now, in Sydney, but that building, which was a kind of bar small 2-story building was allocated in the master plan as for a smaller or emerging practice.
Yeah.
Mm.
How good would
I think
that be?
London is sort of maybe answers partly the second part of Chris's question. I think London has that more so than Melbourne does, and councils maybe putting more, sort of having that knitted in, that like a big development somehow works with a smaller practice. So.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and then we've got a very interesting question from Kimberly Huey. Would you consider designing remotely given the circumstances? So, big example, would you be happy to design a project in the UK from Melbourne? I mean, it must be pretty hard designing something that's in Mount Macedon, but would you consider doing something over in the UK, like an international project?
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, yes, I would. I think that actually could be something really positive to come out of what's happened with this lockdown, because I think particularly in Australia, we're so isolated, and that has really positive aspects, but obviously compared to the rest of the world, we don't work as much internationally. We're much more, even between states, we don't really work. People that are Melbourne architects tend to work in Melbourne, Sydney. And maybe that shows, maybe what's happened now is I think workplaces and how people work will, of course it will all be reconceptualised, but it's going to be completely different. I think that's just obvious.
Yeah. It feels...
To what degree, I don't know, but maybe that will be something that positive that could come out. But
definitely. I mean, it feels to me like there's got to be some restrictions in terms of how connected you might feel to a site. Let's say it was an existing building, a blank site might be a little bit different because you can just say, okay, give me some photos, and depending on how detailed it is, might be quite simple. But then if it's a building where you've got some really lovely bones and you'd love to sort of walk around and see some of those details, that could be kind of challenging. But then it could also open up a lot of architects for more sharing, so that we've got architects who are happy to walk around and they get known as being they get known as the detail finders.
I teach this subject called measured drawing at Melbourne Uni, and we normally go and measure these churches, and we obviously couldn't do it, these historic churches, this semester. We got a point cloud file of St Paul's.
Oh wow. And
you can see everything in the point cloud file. It's just a 3D measured piece of data.
That must be amazing. So how have you found that worked, from having the experience where you got to go in there and touch things and measure them physically, to then having the point cloud CAD file and feeling the space out? How did you find that?
Well, I didn't do the assignment, so I can't quite start the assignment. But I think there's just, obviously, ideally you would do both. You'd have this measured piece of data to go back to, and you would be on site as well, making your own kind of analysis. But I think that the technology is amazing when you think of this, but war zones or places that you can't go, or I don't know, I haven't actually tried doing the assignment. Maybe I'll try over the week and see. But I've seen the students do it. It's very simple to use the file.
Yeah, great.
So I don't know, maybe they could just send you a point cloud file and
off you go. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to have a crack at getting a point cloud file and then having the VR goggles and then getting to experience it in VR. I was just watching a video the other day of this brand new gaming rendering engine that's just ridiculous. So it's almost like it's basically like every single tiny material down to the pebble is now renderable in real time with real lighting. And I'm interested to see if we're going to get to that point with CAD and with architecture, to see if we can do these sorts of things where people can go in and take point cloud images and then send us that much data. But then if you put VR goggles on, it really feels, properly real. Properly real. Okay, well, thank you so much, Ursula, for sharing your Friday night with us. It's been wonderful hearing about your journey, after working in Australia, then going to the UK and getting amazing experience, and then coming back, jumping in the deep end, going straight into the NGV competition. I think that's amazing, and well done on being shortlisted. And then onto this great project out in Mount Macedon. It's going to be fantastic to see all the projects that you're going to do in the future. I can tell that they're going to be amazing. So thank you so much for sharing your evening with us. Happy Friday.
Thank you to everyone for coming to listen.
Everyone, we've had some great questions, and it's been lovely to see everyone come and watch you speak. So thank you so much again also to our wonderful sponsors, Marta, for sponsoring us and for giving us your support, and also Hames. Talk to Hames. What was their new slogan? Think Hames. No, they'll work it out. But yeah, thank you so much for everyone for supporting New Architects. And I guess if you wanted to see us next Friday, please stop by. But yeah, thank you so much, Ursula, and have a great weekend. And everyone else, have a wonderful weekend.
All right, great. See you.